what are your thoughts on cryogenics? Because these days you're seeing I think I saw a documentary and it was showing videos of all these like people just freezing their bodies in hopes that maybe decades later or centuries later, they could, I guess, lack for better words, like defrost their bodies. And like, because by that time, maybe there's some technological advancements and they can cure their, whatever physical diseases they had. Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's like logical to do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think those are two very different questions. I think it's probably possible. Is it happening now? There are quite a few people who've already frozen their bodies. Were they frozen with a correct protocol to avoid splitting all the water in the cells, right? I mean, you know that if you put food in the freezer, certain vegetables don't come out tasting very good, right? You know that some things freeze well, some things don't. And of course, that's been studied over the years. People have looked at how slowly to freeze humans. It all sounds very, sci-fi and gory, but it's been done. And there are bodies in liquid nitrogen around the world. Do we know that we've mastered those techniques yet? And do we know how to bring them back? And will their consciousness be there? We sort of know that, people can die briefly. People can be super chilled by falling into icy lake and then come back alive again, hours later if they're kind of defrosted, and they're still the same person, right? So the brain maintains some memory. Do we know that will happen if you put somebody in liquid nitrogen because we've never tested it, right? It's not a very ethical test. We've done the first bit, put somebody in, but we haven't woken anybody up because they don't want to be woken up until we've figured out the cure for whatever, right? Yeah. So the technical aspect of deep freezing people it may be conquerable, right? I mean, you can do tests on small animals, and there are even much smaller animals called tardigrades, for example. They're called they often have the nickname water bears. They're tiny little millimeter scale things, and they live in water. They're everywhere. There's nothing unusual about them, but they look like kind of grizzly bears.
Yeah,
blown up. They can completely desiccate themselves when they can survive in space. They can go into orbit outside the spacecraft, and they have a way of adapting to that circumstance, which then they can come back alive if you sprinkle some water on them afterwards. Now, we can't ask them whether they remember their favorite color, right? There's no way of they're a bunch of programmed cells. They're not quite the same as having a consciousness necessarily. Now, the other question is it something we should do?
The ethical side of it, yeah.
Yeah, of course, anybody can make an individual choice for themselves, but this is often sold as there's the extension of this, which is, wouldn't it be great if everybody could live longer? We're all very sad, quite rightly, right, when loved ones and family and that they die. And my brother died before Christmas, and he knew it was coming. We knew it was coming, but it doesn't take away from that pain of the memory, right? And
whether it's a job or anything, like, because we know there's going to be an end, we kind of value our life. I think when I was like a couple years ago, I was obsessed with like these vampire shows, and like you see like these vampires who are like immortal and they've been on the planet for like thousands of years, and they're like that. After a certain amount of time, you just stop valuing life as a whole. And that got me thinking, I'm like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. Cause like, if 1,000 years, 2,000 years, like how many partners are you going to have? How many like people, like, unless like everybody's immortal, like at one point things you get used to stuff,
Yeah.
So I agree. There's this whole spiritual thing between life and death that kind of puts our whole journey on this earth together.
Yeah. And I think, of course, accepting that is part of that journey.
Yeah.
And it's something which doesn't come easy, right?
No,
I mean,
definitely not.
You and I are sitting here kind of thinking, well, that's an abstract thing, right? It's not going to happen. Well, knowing that it is, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance about that. We can talk about it, but we haven't quite yet accepted it. Now, of course, I'm a bit older than you, and I've seen people around me pass away and had to deal with that. And of course, then that brings your own mortality into mind.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting aspect of life as well. Of course, children they shouldn't be surrounded by morbidity. They should think about what's possible for them, what they can enjoy, what they can achieve, how they can make sense out of this life. And when that comes in later, and for some people it comes young, some people it comes, some people try to deny it as long as possible.
Yeah.
And our modern society has made that possible in many ways, right? Not only in a kind of, the ultimate end games like cryonics or genome alteration, but just, I can go and buy genes and nobody cares if I'm 55 or 112 and I'm still looking like I'm a teenager, right?
Yeah.
There's this idea that we sell this business of eternal youth in our modern culture. You only have to look back at mid 20th century. I mean, I say it like it's a historical period. I actually lived through some of that, but the world was very different, right? Adults became adults and adults took on responsibilities and they dressed differently. They didn't act like teenagers. I'm on social media, you're on social media, age sort of disappears at some level there. It's a place for, I find it vaguely embarrassing when 55-year-olds act like they're teenagers.
Yeah. No,
but our culture is built around that. And I think that acceptance of the life and death cycle has probably, it's kind of been pushed off as if there is a fountain of youth just over the horizon. And we will, if only we try a bit harder, we will find, as you said, if everybody's going to be immortal, then why not? Well, that has its own baggage as well, right? Surely having children and bringing new people into the world is a very fundamental part of who we are.
Yeah.
Clearly, biologically it is, but even philosophically it is, right? Passing information on, ensuring some kind of legacy. But if we're all going to live forever, then we have to stop having children, because how can we add all those people?
Right. Oh yeah, true.
You and me having the same podcast for the next 1,000 years. Is that going to be interesting?
I'm ready for that. I am ready for that. Let's make that happen.